This is Christine.
And this is Dolly. So we wanted to update you guys since our first episode. As you know, we're podcast noobs. So we didn't really expect all the nitty-gritty details of kind of creating a podcast episode. So it took a really long time to edit. We didn't know how to fade in the music and let it fade out as we started putting our voices in. So it was just like really complicated, right, Christine?
Yeah, I feel like it took much longer than we anticipated. But we finally, I think, broke through the learning curve after, I don't know, like 6 hours. I'm sure it's like the first learning curve of many, but this initial one. And we thought we had like the RSS feed in the bag. Totally didn't. And like we tried to ask our coder friends, like, hey, like, what is this even? Like, why is it so like omnibus? Like, why do you have to pay for it? And no one even seems to know. So
yeah, we had to do our own Reddit research and look through different websites, but there's really no easy answer.
Which, you know, is expected, right? I feel like any good thing in life takes some work, like some dirt.
Yeah, we have a newfound appreciation for just creating content on podcasts.
I think I've always really admired YouTubers, but I have like a new added layer, especially for podcasters. I think it's just like a lot of gritty work. It's like the podcast recording itself obviously is like some work because you have to think of ideas and then you have to obviously have a flow and all that. But that's just really the surface. I feel like all of the editing and the technical aspects, like the codes and stuff like that, like getting it uploaded on Spotify, just took a lot longer than any podcaster has ever been transparent about. So, which makes sense because I think a lot of podcasting like platforms that are super famous are definitely high production and studios of like The Daily. You know, it's hosted by the New York Times or This American Life is NPR, stuff like that. So it makes much more sense why it seems effortless in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it would be pretty cool to see the behind the scenes of The Daily and how they created and all the work that it takes to even edit, because we realize that we say a lot. And it's kind of hard to even realize that we smack our lips or like there's just like small nuances to the way we say things that we never even realized until we were re-listening to.
Right, like editing the podcast. It was just a lot of little things that no one ever thinks about in day-to-day conversation. But when you're like tuning into the radio or tuning into a podcast, because it's so intimate and the listener is not talking, obviously, it's a lot like hyper-focused on the speakers, aka Dolly and I. So we have to make sure things sound flowy and all of that. So anyway.
But now you guys know.
Now you know. If you want to start a podcast, set aside like 6 hours minimum of research, because just like researching took a long time and like learning how to edit on software and whatnot. I mean, that part's not even hard. It's mostly the coding stuff.
Yeah. I think to every hobby, there is like a lot of fun aspects and then there's some not so fun aspects.
Right.
Creates
like,
discipline.
Yeah, it does. And I feel like you can't just like expect hobbies to be super easy. I feel like the hard work makes you realize you want to do it more. Or it makes you realize you don't want to do it.
And there's like delayed gratification in that way.
For sure.
Like we were so excited when we put it on YouTube, and then once we saw it and like listened to it, it's like, oh, wow, it's uploaded.
All of our hard work on the internet, which we've never done before.
Definitely.
So, yeah. To start off, after that long 4-minute winded tangent or intro, to introduce episode 2's topic, we actually had to kind of come up with expectations. Dolly and I had to discuss that a little bit more in depth because we were debating. We sort of mentioned this in the first episode, but yeah, we're debating how much we want to share in terms of our own personal life because we're kind of afraid of putting ourselves out on the internet. We hinted about like the cancel culture, but just, you know, whenever you expose yourself, you put yourself out there, it's just more like fuel for the fire. If anyone ever like spites you or something, you know, technically they can look you up and potentially find things that you said and hold it against you. So obviously we're thinking like worst case scenarios, but you know, you just always have to be prepared when you put yourself out there. So Dolly and I were just sort of not sure how much we wanted to share initially. And we still like, obviously this is an evolving conversation. We're not just like going to tell you everything, but I think we definitely want to be more personal because I think that always makes things more interesting and engaging, and people want to tune into like personal stories and stuff like that. So to start off the podcast, we thought it'd be a good idea to share a little bit more about us.
Yeah. First of all, we're Asian American and we are in medical school right now. So we're medical students. I will be close to being Dr. Dolly soon, which is very surreal. But with the image of Asian American doctor, there is sort of this assumption that comes with it. It's like a lot of parents push their children to become doctors or lawyers. It's like that classic image or stereotype. And a lot of people who don't know us sort of assume our motivations, which can make us feel like we're already boxed in before they even know us. So we were a little hesitant to share that detail in the very beginning.
Because I think like people just sort of think they know you because you're Asian and you're in medical school, like, oh, I have you figured out. And of course, like, yeah, I would say maybe like on average, a lot of Asian American students do go into medical school because maybe like parents pressure them, or at least I do know people like that. But that's not always the case, and I wouldn't say like that's the case for me and Dolly. And so I think it is kind of like the more you share, obviously, like people make categories of maybe where you lie in their mental space. And so we were like a little nervous about sharing those aspects too, because we don't want to be categorized. And I'm not like sure exactly what I'm trying to say, but like when you can't put someone in a category or in a box, I feel like in some ways okay, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
I guess the idea is early on, even when you're 5 years old and 6 years old, in order to make sense of the world, people make categories. This is for boys and this is for girls. And it's easy to do that at first, but obviously you don't acknowledge the complexities of people when you do that. We can like talk about more about why we decided to go into medicine for a future time. But I think another reason that we were sort of hesitant about kind of revealing our professional identity is that it's almost like when you say, oh yeah, I'm in medical school, it kind of sounds arrogant.
Yeah, so that's actually today's topic that we wanted to talk about, was this pretentiousness or potential pretentiousness of doctors, that surround the profession of physicians. I think the more I'm on this path of becoming one myself, I have kind of noticed that, and Dolly sort of hinted that sometimes we're hesitant to share, or at least Dolly and I are. We're not, okay, by the way, we're not like speaking on behalf of all.
Absolutely. It's just personal.
Yeah, not like on behalf of all pre-med or medical students or doctors, of course. This is just Dolly and I's opinion.
Right.
So please always use
Take it with a grain of salt.
Always. But yeah, sometimes I actually don't even tell people I'm in medical school because, again, hinting back on the Asian American thing, people kind of judge you. And then also because I feel like it does have a sense of pretentiousness and I don't want to come across that way. And sometimes it can be kind of hard to undo that. Someone kind of already thinks you're pretentious just based off your profession. It can take more effort to undo that thinking on the person listening, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think sometimes I just say like, oh, I'm in grad school, and I kind of almost dread them asking me what I'm studying in grad school. I just kind of, it's weird. I'm not sure if like other people in medicine also feel that way, but I sort of do, and I think Dolly does as well.
Yeah, a lot of people who hear, oh, I'm a med student, then they see like how much studying there is involved to that and how much money they're making. And so I guess people apply their own value to what that means.
Yeah, I guess if I also reflect more on why I'm hesitant to share, or why I think it's kind of pretentious to say like, oh, I'm a physician, I think it does sort of dive into those aspects of like, people always comment about how much money we'll eventually make, but then they totally forget that we're all like, I don't know, $200,000 in debt with like 8% interest and growing with, federal loans and everything. And a lot of doctors don't even pay that off until like they're old. So it's like, why don't we talk about those aspects? Obviously in the profession people talk about it, but when we're talking about outsiders who aren't in medicine and they just comment on those aspects that are so fluffy, I suppose, or just like all the good sides, they forget all the bad sides as well. And I think it's not like infuriating, but it is sort of, you feel misunderstood, like, oh, you're gonna be making so much money. But I feel like that's not what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about the immense stress about paying back my loans, honestly. Like the second you graduate, it starts, right? Like the 8% interest is already actually accruing, but the payments have to start very quickly. So I think, yeah, those are some reasons maybe why I don't like sharing that, in addition to the Asian American thing. That's always like baseline.
Yeah, and even within the medicine community, I think it's better now, but there used to be a really strong hierarchical nature about medicine. So it's like doctors are maybe at the top of the pyramid, like they are the ones who are running the show. And I think it kind of comes with some TV shows too.
Totally.
Sort of sensationalizes and glamorizes what it means to be a doctor. And so I think that also comes with like more prestige than necessary. And
Right.
so I think kind of there's a lot of different elements to
For sure.
why maybe there is some kind of element of pretentiousness in doctors.
I totally agree. And I think also even looking on my own personal relationship with my primary care physician, it's not that I don't trust my physician, but I think you always have like maybe a little sense of doubt. I mean, of course, it depends. I know some people are like very trusting of their doctors, but I would say on average, like the general public is a little like weary, especially if the doctor's like, oh, take, all these 5 pills and I need an MRI and I need this and that. And you are like, do I need that? Like, how much is insurance going to pay for that? Like, how much are you as a doctor going to make off of my MRI? And so I can totally understand that there is sort of like, is this necessary? This procedure or this medication? Not that that is necessarily pretentious, because I don't think the doctors are always like prescribing things that aren't necessary. I think I would say most doctors are doing their best to make sure the patients are getting what they need. But I know even in my own relationship, I can sometimes be just like not doubtful, but just like an air of suspicion. Just, you want always a healthy dose of just like critical thinking. You don't want to just like blindly accept what people say. So I can see how that can translate over to also not like mistrust of doctors, but definitely not like that all-out trust that there used to be like in the 1960s.
Good point.
But yeah, I would say there are so many elements to why maybe doctors seem pretentious. And maybe that's like a hot take, I'm not sure. But
yeah, I think there's a fine line between kind of being confident and knowing your expertise really, really well, and then being pretentious. And I think that's really hard to sometimes discern.
Totally. I can see that. I think that is a huge like factor for sure. Because of course like you want the doctor to know stuff, but then like when you ask the doctor and they like answer, like is that even pretentious if they know it? Or like is it the listener who's being offended for no reason, or is it the doctor? I think there's definitely like both parties involved. But true. I guess today's episode we can focus more on like what can improve on, because I think there are lots of factors. For example, in medicine, it just takes so much effort to get to where we're at in terms of money and stuff like that. You have to pay for the MCAT, which is like the entrance exam to medical school. And our board exams are upwards to almost $1,000 for the first part. And there's like 3 more parts and they just keep getting more expensive. I think like the third one is like almost $2,000 or more.
Yeah, there's this clinical exam towards the end of medical school, and it happened to get canceled because of COVID, but it was around $1,300.
Right, and that's insane because like we're still students, remember? Like we have zero income. And not to like forget that in 3rd and 4th year, you're working hospitals and stuff. Basically for free. Like you're writing a patient chart notes and you're interviewing patients on behalf of the attending physician and whatnot, and you don't get paid. And of course, we're grateful for the learning opportunity. But, if you think about it, it's kind of like how people joke about, oh, internships should all be paid. But if you think about 3rd and 4th year medical school is essentially an unpaid internship that we must always be extremely grateful for, which of course we are. But I'm just saying these are some elements that could maybe improve in the medical field to make things a little more accessible to other types of people's backgrounds, because I would say overwhelmingly medicine is in a more higher socioeconomic background people, or people who come from families that have physicians, stuff like that. So it's definitely got kind of a vibe, even in medical school. Like I would say a lot of my classmates are kind of, I don't want to say in case you guys are listening. Just kidding. I'm sure you're not.
That's funny.
I don't think anyone from my class would be listening to this, but I'm not like labeling or judging people in my class. I just think that if there was a survey or like a scientific research on us, I do feel there is a trend.
Yeah, maybe it's getting better, but definitely there is a lot of ins and outs to even getting into medical school. And then after getting into medical school, even getting into residency, there's a lot of things that you're not explicitly told, but if you did have a physician in the family, then you would know all of that process better. And so you kind of have a leg up. And I think people who are first generation college students who go into medical school, it is definitely harder or more just challenging to acclimate into that kind of environment.
Yeah, it's super intense for sure, like studying wise. And I think if you come from an academic background, like your parents are professors, even like even if they're not doctors, they can kind of help you in terms of maybe how to critically reason through stuff or think. And I think that's a huge leg up still as well. Like Dolly was saying about first generation college students. Obviously, anyone pioneering for their family on behalf of their family is going to face more challenges right off the bat. That's in any given field for sure. But I think in some ways medicine does have maybe a more stark contrast, like disparity in that, just due to like the finances involved. Because like even interviewing to get into medical school, you know, you have to sometimes pay like a last minute flight that can cost like $800 to get that interview because you're super desperate. Or I mean, unless you're like super great of a student, but most of us, the average Joes out there, are pretty desperate. So like, you know, you want to snatch that interview, and then you kind of have to pay the high fees, and then you got to pay the hotels, and that's really just the beginning because you got to do that all over again for residency interviews.
Yeah, it feels like it never ends, but there is
when we're like
light
50.
at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, it's like a speck, like a dot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially right now with COVID, there has been some concerns of people who are maybe more qualified getting more interviews, and people who usually would have more interviews if it wasn't COVID are not getting as much interviews because it's easier to interview at 20 places because you don't have to travel anywhere and it's all virtual. And I think that creates a lot of disparity too.
Right, because again, that just is taking the top of the class instead of maybe like all of the applicants. And if you think about it, everyone who's already in medical school, I think, is already pretty qualified because they had to jump through a bajillion hoops to get there. And then again to just sort of be like discounted simply because they're not like top 10% of their class, which I think is kind of, I don't know, not a waste, but it's like that's literally just a few doctors if you think about it. Like there's still so many other students.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap in the people who are being interviewed, and so I'm sure the residency programs are going to have some interesting, after matching the programs to the students, there might be a lot of spots left over because they happen to interview the same
pool of students, if that sort of makes sense.
I know, it's kind of complicated, right?
Yeah, but it's okay, you don't really have to know it. It's not that interesting.
Right. No, this is all
very niche.
Yeah. If people who are interested and want to make sure that when they apply to medical school, they know what they're expecting, this is for you.
I suppose. But also, like, this isn't going to become like a pre-med podcast.
Oh, yeah, definitely not.
Yeah.
It's just something that we can speak from an anecdotal experience.
Yeah. We just that'd be a good topic for episode 2.
Yeah, definitely.
It's kind of all over the place, but you know, this is our experience. I think we spent a lot of time discussing the issues in medicine simply because this is our profession, and just the longer you are in a field, you can definitely see the flaws in any field. So this is kind of a critical thinking podcast. So we have some ideas, you know, obviously about how things can improve in terms of making things a little more accessible. You know, I don't think our first board exam should cost like $700, but it does. And I don't think med school should cost an arm and leg, but it does. Yeah, and I guess we get compensated handsomely afterwards, but really have to be financially savvy, in my opinion, to even enjoy any income you get because it's just a lot of debt, you know, if you think about it.
Yeah, that is something that my school is going to talk about, budgeting and paying off your loans before we graduate from medical school. So that is helpful. We'll see. I haven't learned anything yet.
I've learned 0 things, except they always tell me to check on my loans, and I'm just too like anxious to do that.
Right? Because you just see all the interest accruing.
Yeah, it's sad. It's depressing. Like, why would you want to check that? They're like, just make sure things are going. I'm like, what am I checking for? I don't even know.
Like, there wouldn't be any mistakes. At least I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, I guess like, you're supposed to look for mistakes, but I'm just too like scared to look.
True.
Personally.
Yeah.
But whatever floats your boat, I guess.
Yeah. One thing I did want to mention in terms of evening out the playing field, at least during residency, because in residency it's kind of repeating the same cycle of medical school, but you are at least getting paid. But
Barely.
yeah, barely. For the amount of hours you do work. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. During the resident interviews that I was at, one of our programs was saying how they have this interest group where there's these female physicians who come and talk about how to even negotiate salary. And that's something that we're not really taught as women, because I think sometimes that can be a really hard conversation to have.
Totally.
I mean, I don't think anyone is really taught that specifically, unless you're in like business school.
Sure. And even there, I'm sure it's not like prevalent everywhere to learn that. And also, like, to keep in mind, like, we're mid 20-something-year-olds that have never had a real job, like a professional job.
Exactly.
Obviously, we've worked like, okay, not obviously. Again, some posh medical students have never worked jobs before, but Dolly and I both have worked like menial jobs. And of course you learn things from there, but it's not like you're negotiating your pay at Starbucks per se. It's like very standard when you start off.
Right. It's like by hour, you're going to get paid this. That's the end of the story.
Yeah. And if you stay for like a year, you'll get like a 25-cent raise. So it's kind of set in stone, at least in their policy. Or maybe let us know if you did work at Starbucks and you were able to negotiate your pay. I wasn't able to. But anyway, you know, that's not a real like professional job, unless of course you're working like a manager position, but Dolly and I both didn't do that. So point being is that once you start residency, that's kind of your first real job, and you don't even know what to do, like in terms of negotiating pay and those kinds of things. Like we're still, if you think about it, almost noobs or babies in our minds in terms of professional working skills, because we spent like all our lives looking at Pathoma.
which is a book that every medical student pretty much knows.
Inside and out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you're supposed to. I don't know it inside and out.
Right.
Disclaimer.
Like memorizing each page, and this page has endocrinology.
Oh, yeah. People are so neurotic.
Yeah. But you kind of have to be. Med school kind of makes you a little bit neurotic, even if you didn't come into it neurotic.
Maybe. I feel like that's another episode, though, in a way. It's just like that can be a whole thing.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of ways med school is kind of a social experiment. It's like very mentally, I don't know what it's like. It mentally breaks you.
It's like a mental training for sure.
Yeah. I feel like you just cry every other month. And that's like normal, apparently. I don't know. That should be a survey.
I have not cried every other month.
Oh, I haven't either. I just cry like once a year.
Oh, once a year. Yeah, I remember crying.
Yeah.
At
Would
least
you say
once.
like once a year?
These last 2 years I haven't. But the first 2 years,
Okay.
definitely.
First 2 years of medical school. You guys let us know if you're in med school. Did you cry the first 2 years?
We're not trying to fearmonger. We're just honestly talking about some struggles.
No, you guys should know if you're trying to go into medicine, be prepared to cry like once a year minimum. I would say, I feel like that's a good minimum.
Yeah, in a way, there's like mental fortification that comes with being a doctor, which I think is really important.
Totally.
Because you're going to see a lot of suffering and things that you would never expect to see in the field of medicine.
But you know, I also kind of wonder what it's like if you come from a background with like a bunch of doctors in your family. Definitely can hook it up with those connections for residency interviews or just like, you know, stuff like that. I've heard, at least anecdotally, from other students in upperclassmen, you know, settings. But I'm just curious if it is, like, not to say, like, of course, they're not suffering mentally, because I do think just, like, the sheer amount of studying you do mentally fortifies you, as Dolly kind of pointed out. But I'm just, like, curious on the other struggles of med school, if they just have it better off in a way, you know? I'm talking about a very specific type of person, though.
Right.
That comes from a background of doctors.
And I think that is relatively a small proportion.
Right.
So it's definitely not trying to apply to an entire group of medical students.
Yeah, but if you had to, like, pick a niche group, like, that's definitely the group that's, like, prevalent, would you say?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
The trend is decreasing, I think. I'm not
I
sure.
hope.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There is more of an emphasis to recruit underrepresented people, just from all phases of medicine. So like to medical school and then in residency.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I didn't even really notice how big of an issue this problem was, or like I never really consider myself a minority, which, okay, please don't cancel me, because I'm not like trying to like say that Asian Americans don't have struggles. I know we have struggles, okay, but I'm just saying I've never like viewed myself at a disadvantage, I guess. It's just a personal thing, okay, guys? Just a personal feeling that I've never really had. But I was like talking to my mom the other day, who was kind of going through a few like health things, and she was just very like frustrated that there's no female physician that speaks her native language in an area that's pretty urban or whatever, supposedly diverse. And I guess that is kind of shocking because I just never really thought about it because I'm not really looking for someone speaking another language, physician, you know, who's a female. I just kind of look for a female physician who speaks, well, English. So in a lot of ways, I feel like you don't even realize how much lack of representation there is in medicine. Maybe like if you're not like having a mother who tells you those things. So I can see how it doesn't seem like it's an issue, but in some ways I do think it is important that we recruit more people of different diverse backgrounds, including socioeconomic diversity, not just, you know, race, but those things, because that is a huge factor. If you grow up maybe not in the best neighborhoods, I think when you go back and help patients in those areas, there's a huge level of understanding and empathy that goes miles to help those patients.
Yeah, my friend who came from like a rural region in Texas, she wants to go back to her hometown to be a doctor. And I think that's super powerful because she knows exactly what it means to live in a rural region and how there is some like lack of access to seeing a doctor that's outside of like general physician.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that is helpful.
It's super helpful. And so I feel like we should always make an effort to try and do that for people in different types of backgrounds. I don't think it's easy because a lot of times in your training you do get like jaded and burnt out, and so you just kind of want to stay in urban areas, maybe not always go back to your hometown. And that's super understandable. At least I understand that because I'm tired too.
Yeah, I think that's also for another time where we can talk about what it means to go back to an area that's maybe not as like
Desirable?
exciting. Yeah, to go back to your rural hometown. There's a lot more excitement to practice in a urban area
Right. Or like generally
and
speaking.
having the advantages of living even in an urban setting.
Yeah. So there's just so much to medicine that obviously Dolly and I can go on and on and on
Right.
about.
It's pretty great to have a friend who is experiencing the exact same process of medicine at the same time. So we can rant about every struggle that we have.
Yeah, but I think it's also not just like ranting. I feel it's also helped me be really introspective for me in my process of going through this whole stuff, because it's just like a lot of mental battle, as we've hinted before. Like it sounds so silly, but you just like always feel so incompetent all the time because there's no limit to understanding medicine, and so you're just always like trying so hard, and you're like spending hours and hours every single day, even on break and stuff, and then like you just don't get it, and then you're so sad. You're like, wow, I spent all this time and I don't know. And so I think it's very easy to feel like very small and defeated and incompetent. I think in those moments it's really important to have community, you know, that can help you get through that rut, because it's not forever and it's not like you're the only one experiencing it.
In the very beginning, it is hard to find sort of the joys of what we're doing in medicine, but then there comes a time when you like see your hard work pay off, which is great.
Yeah, I haven't felt that.
Yeah, you haven't seen patients yet, but there are definitely great aspects to medicine that make you realize that you are there for a good reason and it keeps you going.
Yeah, I would say overall, but definitely like in the day to day, sometimes it can get hard to remember those things. But yeah, anyway, that kind of trailed off about the pretentiousness of doctors. But I feel like the point was to sort of maybe debunk or also sort of show that behind maybe that false air of pretentiousness, there are potential reasons that doctors may act that way in your eyes. And so hopefully this episode gave you guys insight on maybe your relationship with your doctor, and maybe they're not being pretentious, but you know, there's all these other elements that maybe now give you empathy or insight to why they act the way they do.
Yeah, and all of the struggles that maybe you don't realize when you see already like a doctor who's 10 years into their practice, you know, all of the struggles that did happen before that.
Yeah. I feel like when I talk to those doctors, though, they're always like, yeah, medicine's like so great. It's like a field of daisies. And I'm just like, or like that's when I was a pre-med. I was like, yeah, all gung-ho and fiery. And then 2 years in, I'm just like, Save me.
Yeah, I feel like these physicians kind of shut out like the bad parts of medicine.
It's like PTSD. I
Yeah,
feel
they
like you
kind of
forget.
like, yeah, suppress it.
Yeah, suppress it. But we all need therapy.
Exactly. That's another
another
time.
topic.
Cool. Well, hope you,
Learn something. I
Yeah.
don't know. Maybe not. This wasn't like super planned out. So
yeah, if you liked this content, come back for more.
yeah, or leave us some, comments on our Instagram at Sunday Picnic Pod on what you think about doctors. If you think they're pretentious, yes or yet, why or why not? And yeah, we'd love to engage with you guys in conversation. So please let us know what you're thinking. If you have a different opinion or if you found an interesting article or something, we're always down to learn those things. So feel free to drop them Instagram. Yeah.
We're still new to this thing.
Yeah,
but
we're still new.
yeah, stay tuned.
Stay tuned for the next one. So we'll catch you guys then.
Bye.